Wake up, sheeple! Beware of who you obey. Obedience is all about following orders of those higher up. To figure out why we obey and how to combat or make others obey, stay tuned on this week's episode of Sai-Cology.
You could change everything tonight. This is your chance to do something right.
We are more likely to obey when there are authority figures giving the directions, but we'll cover all that in the next episode about power. Today, though, we'll talk about the person doing the obeying. First, a quick tip. If someone gives us fast-paced instructions, we find it difficult to keep track of things or think as much, so it can be used as an easy and quick technique to get people to obey. We're also more likely to obey if we don't see examples of other people disobeying, as well as if we don't see example of the consequences of what we do if they're negative. When there is someone of authority there giving us commands, people can justify behavior by pushing responsibility for their actions onto that authority figure. This is known as the loss of personal responsibility. One of the worst effects from this diffusion of responsibility is the bystander effect, where we don't act when we're in a large group situation because we think someone else is going to take care of it. Similarly, in a large group, if no one protests someone's orders, we're more likely going to blame the authority figure and the others because they didn't say anything either. We'll also more easily obey to easy commands. Then, once the commands get slightly more difficult, we'll still feel compelled to obey. This is an example of the foot in the door effect that we'll discuss more in episode 14. This is an example of self-justification, which is what we do to combat cognitive dissonance. One way to facilitate this is by breaking down a big task into smaller increments, so we have only smaller decisions to make, which are easier. That way, as a task increases, we just let ourselves obey by saying it's not that different from what we just completed. In general, though, self-justification is a great example of our human ability to flee from reality. We hate taking responsibility for negative or stupid actions, so if someone else is in charge, we can easily justify what they tell us and obey. Conversely, if you want someone to obey you, you need to prime them and their mind to justify what they'll be able to do in order to ease them into compliance. Another reason people obey is learned helplessness. This is when people feel they have no control and begin to accept their conditions and obey. This can create a self-fulfilling prophecy where we become what others want or expect from us because we give up on ourselves. Learned helplessness is about our responses to failures and plays a big role in stress and depression as well. Those who feel helpless most likely have a low self-efficacy, which is in tune with our style of attribution. One can have an internal attribution where they blame or credit themselves whenever something happens, or an external attribution where they blame others or the task they were doing for being designed that way. You can also have a stable or unstable attribution, which describes if the way you attribute things varies situation by situation or stays the same no matter what the circumstances. Finally, you can have a local or global attribution, which is whether you think the reason is specific to that task or all tasks related. So if you fail a math test, is it because you're just stupid or is it because you're not good at math? Those prone to learned helplessness usually have an internal, stable, and global attribution style. The final reason I'm going to cover about why people obey is conditioning. Again, because humans love familiarity and routine, they can easily be exploited through conditioning. I'm sure many of you have heard of Pavlov and his experiments with dogs, so I won't cover it in depth. But conditioning in a human level is similar. Conditioning is how we develop responses to stimuli that aren't first nature. We learn from past experiences, and essentially learn that certain actions have correlated results. So, if we're trained to act a certain way or due to a certain routine, we're going to continue to act that same way. Through training and conditioning, we can learn or be taught to obey. Today, we talked about obedience. Next week, we'll talk about power. Before you go, here are some instructions for you to obey. First, scroll down, hit that like, subscribe, and bell button. Then, comment down below any thoughts, questions, or experiences you have. See you next time, and remember to behave yourself.